Shalom and welcome to the ICEJ weekly webinar. This is David Parsons, one of the vice presidents and senior spokesman for the Christian Embassy here in Jerusalem, coming to you from our headquarters in the Israeli capital. We're glad for everyone joining us from around the world. We're talking about the results of the Israeli elections. We've had a bit of a break on the weekly webinar because of our Sukkot celebration, and we're picking this back up now, and we've got a big story to deal with here coming out of all the Sukkot holidays. Israel has just gone through its fifth election in 43 months, just a little over 3.5 years, and the results are looking like we are out of the political impasse that Israel's been stuck in for almost 4 years, with Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's longest serving prime minister already. Looks like he's going to get a third chance to rule the country. Back in the 1990s, he had 3 years, and then from around 10 or 11 years until 2021, the past year and a half or so, he was in opposition, but he's back now. It's looking as they count up the last of the votes. And part of the surprise of the election is the margin that he's won. We've had so many close elections, 60, 61 seats on each side, or 59. It was so close. But because Israel has this threshold of certain, a party has to get at least 3.25% of the raw vote in order to get in the Knesset. That's about worth 4 Knesset seats in order to get in. There were several parties that were being projected as close who didn't make it. You then have to take, say, their 4 seats and redistribute them. And so there was one on the right, 2 on the left, Meretz, and one of the 3 Arab parties, Balad, that didn't make the threshold. That has to be redistributed among the other parties. And it's very clear that right of center, the nationalist camp, led by Bibi and Netanyahu and the Likud, is going to be able comfortably to form a government. And there is, I think, among most Israelis, a sense of relief that the political impasse of the last couple of years is over. We can see these results here. This was from 87% of the vote counted, and it's up in the high 90s now. It's almost final. These numbers really won't change. The Likud with 32 seats, they're up 2 from last time. The Yesh Atid, Yair Lapid, who was serving as caretaker prime minister, part of the former government, he's up to 24, but his centrist party didn't do enough to block Netanyahu from coming back to power. The National Unity Party, this is Gantz and Gideon Sa'ar, Benny Gantz, former IDF chief of staff and defense minister in last government, along with Gideon Sa'ar, who's right of center, used to be in Likud, but they got 12 votes, 11 for Shas, which is the Sephardic ultra-Orthodox party. That's better than they've been doing in recent years, up to 2 Knesset seats from last time. They're going to be part of the coalition. Here, the Jewish Home, Naftali Bennett, even though he had 7 seats in the last Knesset, it was quickly 6 when he joined the government. He served as prime minister for a year, but his party has basically disappeared. He took a break from politics after their government fell a few months ago, and Ayelet Shaked couldn't get them past the electoral threshold. So they've sort of disappeared. Labor, only 4, that's down from 7. Michaeli on the left, she's having to answer some questions about their poor showing. United Torah Judaism, this is the Ashkenazi ultra-Orthodox party. They got 8 seats. That's fairly normal for them. Israel Beitenu is Avigdor Lieberman and his Russian party. He's down from 7 to 5. and he's not going to be much of a player. He used to be in Bibi's camp, but he's been with the center and with this last government, and so he's going to be in the opposition. Here's the big news: religious Zionism over here on the far right, 14 seats. That's up from 6 last time. They more than doubled. A lot of it is the Jewish Home Party. Bennett and Shaked lost a lot of their votes here, maybe some from Likud or some from Gideon Sa'ar. They voted for it's an alliance of 3 religious nationalist parties, including some that say they have Kahanist leanings. We'll talk about that with today's guests. Meretz disappeared. They're down from 4 to 0. This is the far left Jewish Arab party. And Hadass and Ra'am. Ra'am was in the government, and Hadass, another Arab party. These two have made it back in with 5 seats, but they Ra'am won't be a part of the government this time. And then Balad has disappeared. They were in the last government along with Hadass. I mean, in the last Knesset along with Hadass as the Arab joint list. But the disappearance of Balad and Meretz from this Knesset, they didn't make the threshold, means those 8 seats have to be redistributed. And whereas projections were that Bibi had a chance, he had a good chance to get maybe 61 seats to form a government, and now looks like he may have at least 65 seats or even more in between Likud and their natural partners on the right in the religious Zionist and the ultra-Orthodox religious parties. And we're going to see if we can bring on our guest now, if he's ready.
I am ready.
Okay, Gil, show thyself.
Hello.
Hi, this is Gil Hoffman. He's been a friend of the embassy and a friend of our webinar, been a guest on our webinar several times, helping us understand this rough and tumble sport of Israeli politics. Some of you may remember Gil as the chief political correspondent for the Jerusalem Post for 24 years. And but now recently he took up the post as executive director of Honest Reporting. It's one of the main media monitoring groups out of Israel, very important, sort of birthed out of the Second Intifada. And I'm sure that Gil, if you've heard him before, he's a very sharp, astute analysis of Israeli politics, but also with a lot of humor. He's an excellent speaker. He's spoken in just about every state of the union, a bunch of other countries. This new position, I hope it really gets you around some more, Gil, to speak in public and defend Israel as a democracy and as the Jewish state. And he's also lecturing at the Israel College of Management in Rishon LeZion. And he has a large family. He's a busy father as well. But it's great to have you, Gil.
It's a pleasure being with you, David, and to the 120 participants here on this Zoom and more people watching on other social media, YouTube.
Gil, it looks like we lost you a minute. Let's try and do this again. Let's wait for him a minute.
And so I have brought her now for all these 5 votes that there have been. Yes. We've also had a race for mayor of Jerusalem and a runoff race. She turned 6 yesterday. Okay. And so when she was still 5, she was already voting for the 7th time. That's how intense it is. Yes. And I think that impacted our election because people were sick and tired of this political chaos. Yes. Most elections in the world that are close are decided by swing voters. in American elections, both the Democratic and Republican Party go to the center of the political map. Here, who were these swing voters that were supposed to decide our elections? Well, it was not immediately clear. In past elections, it had been clearer. We had an election in 1996 between Netanyahu and Shimon Peres. And then it was clear Netanyahu was on the right, Peres was on the left. And so they went to the center. Netanyahu's campaign slogan was Netanyahu osim shalom batuach, making peace in a secure kind of way. Peace not being a word generally associated with Netanyahu, at the time anyway. Peres' slogan was Israel chazaka, chazaka, im Peres, Israel strong with Peres. Peres, of course, not being associated with strength.
Yeah.
And so that was very, very clear who the center of the political map was.
Yeah.
And that also a year ago, we had an election where there wasn't a right-wing camp or a left-wing camp. There was a camp of one Shakespearean cliche, to Bibi or not to Bibi, that was the only question. And every party leader had joined one camp or another, except for one, Naftali Bennett. And this is Leori, who can say hello to you.
Hi, Leori.
And so because Naftali Bennett did not join one camp or another, he got to hold the balance of power and decide who should be the prime minister. And he, of course, decided on himself. So, but this time around, who were the swing voters? You all know an Israeli or two, or have met one or two. David knows millions of them. Have you ever met anyone who doesn't have an opinion on Netanyahu? They all do. So if we didn't have swing voters, we had what we call stability voters. Stability voters are people who decided that ending the chaos was the most important thing to do. And so that's why a lot of people who didn't want Netanyahu to be prime minister decided that they were going to let him do it anyway. And they voted for him or for one of his satellite parties. And I think that's what carried him to victory. There was one other thing that carried him to victory, which was security. Talk about in just 1 second. Little girl, I'm going to open this for you, and you should play with it now while I talk to these nice people. Oh, then don't do it. Do something that does not require help for a little bit, okay? Because I'm going to talk to these nice people. So security, there had been terrorist attacks, both in the last few days before an election, causing an October surprise in any country, and primarily here, where Netanyahu in the past has taken advantage of security challenges because Netanyahu, I'm going to let people finish the sentence and fill in the blank because I don't have an opinion. Netanyahu is either brainwashed or succeeded in convincing Israelis with his unprecedented persuasive abilities that he and only he can make them feel safe. So it was bound to happen that Netanyahu would win this election. And it has to be kept in mind that the Palestinian Authority had a responsibility to stop this terror. The Lion's Den terror group acted in cities that have been controlled by the Palestinian Authority since the mid-1990s, and they failed to stop them. And there's a government that might be harder on them than the previous one, then they have only themselves to blame. Now,
that
the last thing I want to say before questions is just to understand that now, because Netanyahu can only pretty much form a right-wing homogenous government unless someone's lying here about not sitting with him, this is a government that will not look as good to the liberal media around the world, to governments around the world. Israel is getting ready for an onslaught of a bad press and criticism. And you as supporters of Israel through the International Christian Embassy, we're going to need you more than ever. I mean, and my organization, Honest Reporting, too. I've been warning for months that after having what I called a honeymoon of sorts, where we had the most diverse government in Israel's history, perhaps the most diverse government in the history of mankind on this earth, with right wing and left wing and centrist together, and an Arab party for the first time, which looked wonderful to the world, which likes diversity. We're now going to have the kind of government that the world doesn't like, with a couple Arabs less in the Knesset, with Netanyahu, who the world would see his return as regressive, if not a worse word, and the rise of Itamar Ben-Gvir, who David spoke about, with another 5 seats from his Jewish Power party behind him, who in the past said very racist things like expel all Arabs. He toned down his support. He toned down his rhetoric for this election in order to gain more supporters. He said, now I'm only in favor of expelling terrorists. That's something Yitzhak Rabin did. That's not controversial. But then in his victory speech, he kind of proved right. The people who said he was just doing that tactically, he hasn't calmed down in any way. When he said, we're going to be the landlords over here. Landlords over who? Obviously over Arabs. He's talking about Jews having power over Arabs. That looks terrible to the world. And so my team at Honest Reporting, that is the main organization fighting for Israel in the international mainstream and social media, at honestreporting.com and on every social media outlet, this is why we exist. We're going to be fighting this all around the world, and it's not going to be easy with the small team that we have, but we're going to do the best that we can because Israel needs this for the future. This is why we exist. Like, the organization has been around 20 years. I'm sure it did wonderful things before I got there, and I've gotten 5 anti-Semitic journalists fired since I got this job, including 3 at the New York Times. But from now on, this is why we exist, and I'm glad that I'm taking on that role.
Okay, yeah, it's going to be exciting to see you in this new role and to see what all you can do to keep other reporters honest, as we say, and fair. But it is a challenge. I think you've just laid out a real challenge for us as Christian supporters of Israel, of what the components of this new government, how it's going to be viewed in world capitals and in the liberal media. And in the big tech, we've got a battle on our hands. But first of all, how much do you see these parties that didn't make it in, like Meretz, Balad on the left, Ayelet Shaked on the right? The polls showed she probably wouldn't make it. But on the left, for 2 of those parties, it represents at least 8 seats that get redistributed elsewhere. How big of an impact was that on this election? It looks like Bibi went from 61 margin perhaps to 65 or more.
You're absolutely right, David. It had a huge impact because we had a tie when it came to the popular vote, just like has happened in the past in the United States and elsewhere, but it's not reflected in the results that matter at all. There were about 4 seats wasted by Meretz, 3 seats wasted by Balad, 2 seats wasted by Avigdor Lieberman not making a vote sharing agreement on excess votes, and 1 seat wasted on Labor making a vote sharing agreement with a party that did not cross the threshold, rendering that vote sharing agreement trash. Whereas on the right, Netanyahu did a great job before the election of uniting different parties on the right, the 2 ultra-Orthodox parties running together, 3 right-wing parties to the right of Likud running together, vote-sharing agreements for all of them for surplus votes beyond the mandate, to make sure no votes would be wasted at all, except by Ayelet Shaked, who you pointed out, who happens to get equal support from the to Bibi and not to Bibi camps. And her staying in the election till the end ended up raising the number of votes that were cast, which raised the electoral threshold to higher and killed Meretz.
That's interesting. I think Gil's given us some of the intricacies of Israeli politics and elections that a lot of these parties will do a deal. Sometimes it's a party on the right and on the left. They do a vote sharing agreement that if we only have enough for 5 seats, but we have a little excess and you have a little excess, the one with the most excess you share that so that they can benefit. And you're rolling the dice, but Ayelet Shaked didn't do it. Her votes drove up the number of votes you need to get a Knesset seat, and it helped keep Meretz and Balad out. That's very good analysis. How much it does look like the people in the national camp, in Bibi's natural camp on the right, that there was a higher turnout this time. And how much was that, can you attribute to caretaker Prime Minister Yair Lapid really taking a risky and even reckless move, concluding this Israel-Lebanon maritime border agreement?
Oh, you're going too far.
Huh?
You're going too far.
Is it? You don't think
People don't
that
vote
was
on
an
such
impact?
things.
They
No.
don't. It's all personality.
No, I'll tell you the Lapid, yes, the Lapid personality, absolutely. This was part of Netanyahu's strategy. Netanyahu got advice from Yariv Levin, who is a former Knesset speaker and the politician closest to him, to do whatever he could to ensure Lapid would become caretaker prime minister, not Naftali Bennett, because that would motivate Likud voters who in the past didn't vote, because if they voted for Netanyahu, he would be prime minister, and if they didn't vote for Netanyahu, he would be caretaker prime minister, and they didn't care this time to vote in order to get Lapid out of there, and ultra-Orthodox voters to get Avigdor Lieberman and Lapid out of there, Lieberman being the finance minister who cut their benefits. So that was the motivation. It was a very smart tactical move. You mentioned another part of this caretaker prime minister idea. Having motivation now when they form a government to go quicker also helps Netanyahu. They want to reach an agreement on a new government as soon as possible in order to get Netanyahu back in the prime minister's office.
Yeah. I mean, it was in the headlines during the latter stage of this campaign. There wasn't much else really stirring it, but this agreement and with Lebanon. It's actually an agreement Israel made with the U.S. and an agreement, a parallel one that Lebanon made with the U.S. They never signed the same piece of paper, but it was in the headlines. And Bibi said that he wouldn't ditch it, but he would neutralize it. What do you think he's going to do with that?
So the Lebanon agreement, was an unheard of thing to have a government in Israel approve when it's not really in power, an agreement with a foreign power who does not recognize Israel, with an enemy state. That was a very big deal. I still don't think it impacted the election, with all due respect. Israelis vote on personality, they vote on security. I think that all the details of the Lebanon plan, you got to be really smart to understand why these waters are okay and other waters aren't, and it lets our waters not be attacked. And there we found gas in the place where we agreed on. They didn't find gas. Too complex for a voting issue. But you're right, it's unprecedented and history, for better or for worse.
But it was an election ploy by Lapid to try and get more votes. He got a few more votes, but he's sitting in opposition now. He's on his way out. And
he would say he did it for the good of the country, but Netanyahu also says he does things for the good of the country, and the journalists don't buy it.
Yeah. Now, we're going to get into the details of this. It looks like the prospective government that's going to come into power with Netanyahu and his partners on the right, and the concerns that it may not be palatable to a large part of the world. There is an alternative of perhaps instead of the religious Zionism parties on the right that have some, particular baggage with them. that he could form a government with Benny Gantz and Gideon Sa'ar and the National Unity Alignment. But I understand they say we're headed for the opposition. Any chance of it?
They say they're headed for the opposition. Those are the leaders. Sa'ar and Gantz and Gadi Eisenkot, the former chief of staff of the IDF, who they brought in, who didn't help them at all, are all saying that they're headed for the opposition. Well, no, I haven't seen anyone ask that question to Michael Biton, an rather unknown member of parliament who's on their list, who was the mayor of Yerucham, a development town in the south, and he cares more about socioeconomic issues. And maybe they could buy him off with a portfolio. Yifat Shasha Biton, the current education minister, has no political ideology. She's been in a couple different parties. Maybe she can be bought off. To get to 12, you need 4. Well, there's ways of doing it. And Netanyahu wants to. He wants not to make an agreement with another party to the center left. He wants to steal members of parliament from the center left.
Okay, and in a way that's important because it then reduces his reliance on the religious Zionism parties, right? If it's just the United Torah Judaism, Shas, and religious Zionism, that's Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir, then he's really reliant. They can hold him over the barrel on certain issues, but if he has a few extra folks, it reduces their power over him.
You're exactly right. And right now, every party that would be joining the government could bring it down. That is not healthy. That's why in the past, before political chaos of the last couple of years, prime ministers tried to get 80 seats in their coalition so no party could bring them down. We haven't seen that for quite a while.
Yeah. Okay, let's help us out and understand this religious Zionism party. This sort of, I don't want to say it really follows in the steps or the legacy of the old National Religious Party, which was the national religious camp that was really birthed through Rav Kook at the birth of the state, and these became the supporters of the settlement movement, settling the whole land of Israel for religious reasons and serving in the army, not like the ultra-Orthodox. But this new sort of religious Zionism with Itamar Ben-Gvir, how much of a problem is he, and is Smotrich and some of the others, are they more palatable than him?
No, they're all politicians who will cause a problem for Israel abroad. They're not going to like any of them in the international media. Bezalel Smotrich said he was a proud homophobe. Well, that doesn't do too well in the press around the world. That doesn't do too well with people that want to support Israel who are in who don't like such statements, and the already Jewish organizations in the United States have warned Netanyahu against forming a government with them, which is too late. We're already getting very bad press of the most right-wing government in Israel's history. It's been billed by CNN. It's not going to years. If you didn't hear me for a second there, I got a call. So that's a problem we're going to have to be dealing with.
Itamar Ben-Gvir himself, he seems to be a real provocateur, that he shows up at the whole flashpoints of the Temple Mount with a gun on his side, wanting to go up on the Temple Mount, or over at Simon the Righteous tomb in Sheikh Jarrah, that he really tries to provoke certain things at certain moments. I don't know if it's just to make headlines. Do we still have you? Did we lose you there, Gil? You still with us? Can you hear me?
It's because I turned the-
You still with me, Gil?
No, Itamar, guys, I'm with you.
Okay,
I hear you perfectly.
okay.
I'm very much here with you, David. And I hope that you can hear me okay.
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
Itamar, good. Itamar Ben-Gvir
Gil, it looks like we've lost you again. It's a bad connection. It's a bad connection there.
look very bad around the world. This is going to be a big challenge. He talked during the campaign that LGBT are his friends, and he doesn't say what he used to say. That Mayor Kahana, who was his rabbi, he doesn't agree with him anymore. He has to prove that. He has to prove that when he comes to power, he can be more pragmatic. But we already saw the number 2 on his list speak today in favor of conversion therapy for gays. That's not something that's going to win him any friends.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I know there was an incident a few years ago where someone had sent New Testaments in Hebrew to all the members of the Knesset, and Itamar Ben-Gvir was a Knesset member at the time, and its chief of staff, I think Michael Ben-Ari, ripped up a New Testament in his hands. And there's a lot of Christians who still remember that incident. But a lot of the concern is towards the LGBTQ community and also the Arabs. When we say Kahanist, Meir Kahane, of course, was assassinated, but he believed in forced transfer of the Arabs out of the land, which ethnic cleansing is also heavily frowned upon today.
Absolutely. And we're talking about 6 members of Knesset. It was one thing when it was 1. The party of Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, they ran together, and they've already decided they're not going to remain together. They're going to be 2 separate factions in the Knesset in order to maximize what they get from Netanyahu in coalition talks, in order to extort from him as much as they could, so they can have 3 ministers for Smotrich's party and 2 ministers for Ben-Gvir's party. And there's another party that ran with him called Noam, who has 1 guy. He'll try to get something too. It's not going to leave too many jobs for Netanyahu's Likud. That's going to be a challenge. Who's going to be the foreign minister and represent this government to the world? It's not going to be an easy job. Who's going to be the finance minister to pass a budget when the ultra-Orthodox are going to be paid off handsomely? It should be fascinating. That's, by the way, an untold story from this election is that the ultra-Orthodox have a record number of members of parliament. Aryeh Deri, the leader of Shas, won 11 seats. That's incredible.
And how is Netanyahu? He said, look, I'm the one who's going to set policy, but how is he going to manage this relationship with these far-right parties, and how much leverage do they really have over him?
That Netanyahu would make a point of having centrist and left-wing people in his coalition and leaving the most right-wing government out. He did that. It was called the National Union time, and so it made more flexibility for Netanyahu. In the center left, as that they want to cooperate with Netanyahu, and so they are that leaves Netanyahu really beholden to these people. And also his cases, his criminal cases. Because of them, him wanting to delay as much as possible his trial or take any action that would make it harder for the legal system to get at him, only the parties in his bloc would let him do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Look, I understand you have something else that you're going to. Gil's
They
busy.
just sent me a message saying that they're running late. So, you know,
Okay.
I get to the car to try to accommodate all people and continue talking to you. You can feel free to continue asking questions.
Okay. All right. Well, look, you brought up the trial that Netanyahu is involved in on 3 different cases of fraud, breach of trust, and one of them includes bribery charges, very serious. But the tradition was that if an Israeli leader was about to go under indictment, they would resign and go deal with it and then try and make their political comeback. But he says this is a witch hunt by certain members of the police, the media. And so he's stuck with it, but he's stuck with it through 5 elections now. And finally, he has a mandate again to govern. Why did he? I mean, it takes a lot of fortitude to go through that. Why is he still so interested in serving as prime minister?
David, it's interesting that in half an hour, no one has mentioned Iran, right?
Yes.
Well, Netanyahu does. Netanyahu believes that stopping the nuclearization of Iran is his not only his top priority, but his destiny. And
Yes.
he needs to stay in order to do it, that no one else can do it. That, I mean, I can tell you that Yair Lapid took action that resulted in the delay of the nuclear program quite successfully. And so did Naftali Bennett. And if anything, they proved that we don't need to have only Netanyahu as prime minister. But that's obviously not the way he thinks. He believes he's saving Israel. Now, that's his point of view. Now, there's the more cynical answer that it's a lot harder to prosecute you when you're prime minister.
Yeah. But look, he had a lot of years. Some critics say, look, he had a lot of years to deal with the Iranian nuclear program, and he never did. He never attacked it. We don't know if that'll happen. But I agree that, you know, his father was Ben-Zion Netanyahu, who was an historian, and I think Bibi considers himself something of an historian himself. He knows Jewish history, and really is one to build even further on his legacy as this unprecedented leader in the modern Israel's rebirth. But does he have a chance to make peace with the Saudis now? What's he going to do with Turkey and Erdogan? Some of these other issues.
You saw his victory speech, right? So
Yes.
while Ben-Gvir gave a victory speech about being the landlords and upset a lot of people, Netanyahu's victory speech was conciliatory. Netanyahu spoke about making peace with more of our neighbors, making reference to the Abraham Accords, and internal peace inside Israeli society. That was quite impressive for him to send a fig leaf, an olive branch. That's the word there. To those who didn't vote for him. He didn't have to do that. And so the continuation of the Abraham Accords depends on a couple of things happening. He has to get along with the president of the United States, right? Biden is the president for at least 2 more years. Who knows who the Democratic candidate is going to be in the next election? Who knows who's going to win that election? And unless Biden really wants there to be Arab and Muslim countries joining the Abraham Accords, it is arguably the only Trump policy that he's endorsed. Then it won't move forward. You would think that he would want it to. Also, Biden has a complicated relationship with Saudi Arabia that is obviously much worse than Donald Trump had. And Saudi Arabia has been the key to every agreement in the Abraham Accords.
Yeah. Look, Netanyahu already reportedly met face-to-face with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, the leader in waiting in Saudi Arabia. So they've already met in person, and there's a real opportunity for him there. But Gil, I look at Israel having these historic reconciliations with some of the Arab countries in the region, the peace with Egypt warming up. But it does seem that like there's some real troubles reconciling with Israel's own Arab population, and that there is an opportunity to do this, that even though Bibi criticized the Ra'am party as being Muslim Brotherhood, you let him into government, he actually was in talks with him himself to maybe support him outside the government an election or so ago. What can he do to help heal the rifts between the Jewish and Arab communities in Israel?
Netanyahu is the father of the relationship with the Israeli Arab citizens. He's the one who made this agreement with Ra'am happen. He didn't enjoy the fruits of it, but he laid the groundwork for it. He allocated the funding for it. He gave it the legitimacy that Bennett and Lapid took advantage of. And so in recent months, in order to criticize the old government, he called the Ra'am party all kinds of names. But the fact is, this is a party that promised to deal only with the Israeli Arab issues that are not controversial, of infrastructure and education and fighting internal Arab crime. There's nothing they want to do that could oppose it. And they kept their promise for most of the time. There was one time right after the Temple Mount had violence that they pretended to protest. They said they were leaving the coalition. They came back. They left during recess, right? They weren't even meeting. And then they came back an hour before the first vote. So that kind of BS protest, there's nothing wrong with them. And Netanyahu would cooperate with them in one way or another. Smotrich might stop them.
Yeah, I think there's a need to work on this, and an opportunity for Benjamin Netanyahu, as he my headline out of this is that Bibi is back at Balfour, the official prime minister's residence on Balfour Street in central Jerusalem. We've been talking to Gil Hoffman. He is the executive director of Honest Reporting. He was the former Jerusalem Post political correspondent for 24 years. He knows Israeli politics inside and out, and he's a busy man right now. We really appreciate your time. Any other thoughts? How long will it take to form a government, and what do you think the immediate agenda will be?
Well, November 15th is the day the Knesset gets sworn in, and that is when they want to have the ministers already appointed. I really doubt it, but that is the goal for Netanyahu. Stay tuned to my old website, www.jpost.com. Stay tuned to updates from David, and go to honestreporting.com, and any support that people could give us in fighting the media battlefield. We appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank to Gil Hoffman for his time here. We're going to come back next week with another ICEJ weekly webinar. I think we're going to have a separate program on the Israel-Lebanon maritime border agreement, the ramifications, what's happening with Turkey, some of those other developments with another expert. That'll be coming up in a couple weeks. We also have on November 24th, we'll do a webinar on the 75th anniversary of the UN partition plan, which is important to Israel's chain of title in their legitimacy of Israel as a Jewish state. And that's coming up, but there's also on the anniversary of November 29, vote on the partition plan, 1947. There's also a lot of anti-Israel votes at the United Nations. Today it's become a tradition, and we'll be talking about that as well with a former top advisor, top staffer in the U.S. Congress, Gil Hoffman, who now works with an arm of B'nai Brit to deal with all the anti-Israel bias and votes and activities against Israel at the United Nations. So we've got some good webinars coming up in coming weeks. And of course, next week, our global prayer gathering Wednesday at 4 p.m. We've got some good guests. Join us then. But we want to thank Gil Hoffman again for joining us today, talking about the results of the Israeli election on Tuesday and where they are. It looks like Benjamin Netanyahu is headed back into the premiership here. He has a bit wider government than was expected, but there are some concerns about to his far right, some of the policies and rhetoric and actions of some of these partners and how much trouble that's going to cause and the ripples of that out in the wider world for Israel, but also an opportunity for this man with an unprecedented legacy of leadership of this nation. Israel's longest serving prime minister is going to get some more time in leadership here in Israel. And for many Israelis, it's a relief that the political impasse of the last 3.5 years, 4 years, they're coming out of it. And we have to conclude by saying we need to thank God for keeping the country strong and stable and thriving despite the political uncertainty and chaos. It's almost like Israel doesn't need a government. Certainly you do, but somehow the hand of providence is over this nation, that it continued to be strong and stable, secure, prosperous, even with these very weak and fleeting governments of the past 3.5 years. That is over. Bibi is going to be king again. And we need to keep praying for him and all the challenges that he and this nation faces. Thank you for being with us here on the ICEJ weekly webinar. David Parsons saying shalom from Jerusalem.
Thank you for joining us today. We'll see you next Thursday at 4 p.m. Be sure to subscribe and follow us on our social media pages for more exclusive ICEJ content.